My fiancée and I were living in Burnsville when we thought we found the deal of a lifetime, a charming little house in the downtown area of Prior Lake. Built in 1919, it had been newly remodeled with everything modern and fresh. I fell in love the moment I stepped inside. My fiancé, though, wasn't convinced. There was something about the place that seemed to weigh on him, something I didn't see. After some pleading on my part, we moved in on the 1st of April 2008. By December, we had our son. That first night it happened, he was asleep in the next room while I sat in the dim light, waiting for my fiancé to get home from his late shift. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wood. Then I heard it. Laughter. Faint but unmistakable. An old man's voice chuckling through the baby monitor. I froze. My heart pounded as I strained to hear more, but the laughter had already faded into the static. My rational side took over, and I convinced myself it must have been interference, some stray signal picked up by the monitor. Still, I brought my son into my room, locked the door, and sat there in the darkness, ears pricked for any sign of the laughter returning. Nothing happened that night, but the unease lingered, creeping into the corners of my mind. It wasn't until a few days later that my fiancé came to me, pale and shaken. He had heard it too, laughter, deep and gravelly, coming from the baby monitor while he watched TV. The way his voice trembled when he told me sent chills down my spine. We both knew then that something was off, something wrong with the house. Soon after, another strange thing happened. It was late, 12:30 a.m., the house bathed in silence. My fiancé and I were lying in bed, almost asleep, when we both heard giggling. At first we thought it was the neighbor's daughter, but it was too loud, too clear, and far too late for any child to be playing outside. The sound didn't seem to come from the street, but from within the walls. My fiancé stiffened beside me, and we exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of us said it aloud, but we both knew something was terribly wrong. That night, I barely slept. The anxiety began to take root after that, an overwhelming sense of dread that clung to me every time I walked through certain parts of the house. The worst of it was in the basement, particularly near the corner where we had set up a bar. There was something oppressive about that space, something that made my skin crawl. One night, unable to shake the feeling, we moved the bar, hoping to uncover some rational explanation. We found nothing but dust and concrete. But as we stood there, staring at the empty corner, I felt watched, not alone. The next day, we discovered something chilling. From outside, we noticed an old stovepipe leading from the basement corner all the way up to the roof. Hidden behind the new sheetrock, it seemed out of place, like a piece of the house's history trying to surface. My fiancé, always the skeptic, suggested it might have something to do with the giggling girl and the laughing man. A dark theory formed in our minds. Had there been a fire? Had something more sinister happened in that corner? The thought haunted us, but without proof, we pushed it aside. By the following April, we had made the decision to move. On moving day, I stayed behind to clean the old house, determined to close this chapter once and for all. My fiancé was already at the new place, and it was just me and our 4-month-old son in the empty house. It felt strange, like the air was heavier, as though the house knew we were leaving. At around 10:30 p.m., I finished taking pictures of the rooms, one last look at the place that had become a nightmare. I went upstairs to use the bathroom, leaving my son asleep near the front door. That's when I heard it. A cry, soft at first, a whimper that drifted through the house. Then it grew louder, more anguished, until it swelled into a piercing scream, one that felt as though it was coming from the walls themselves. My blood turned to ice. Heart racing, I rushed down the stairs to find my son still sound asleep, completely undisturbed. But the air was thick, almost suffocating. I felt a presence in the room, something watching me, mocking my terror. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my son, fled the house without even locking the door, and didn't stop running until the streetlights blurred through my tears. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling of that scream. I tried to tell my friend, but the words wouldn't come until we were far, far away from that place. It wasn't until weeks later, when I looked through the pictures I'd taken, that I saw her, the little girl. In the reflection of the dining room window, ghostly pale, a smile on her lips that sent a shudder through me. Her eyes were hollow, dark pools that seemed to stare straight through me, as if she had been waiting for me to notice her. I showed the picture to my mom, and the next day she called me, her voice trembling. "I see him," she said. "The man in the top window." I pulled up the photo again, and there he was, above the girl, looming over her like a shadow. A man in a top hat, his face twisted into a grin that made my stomach churn. But that wasn't the worst of it. As we looked closer, adjusting the angles and lighting, more figures began to appear, 3 other men and what looked like a baby. A cold realization settled over me. We had lived among them, unseen, unknowable, and now I could never forget them. The house still stands empty, waiting for the next family to uncover its secrets. But I can't help but wonder if the girl is still there, crying for help that will never come. Our house was built by my parents on land once owned by a wealthy family. Like most of the neighbors, they bought the land and constructed our home on it. To my knowledge, no one has ever died here. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, something about this place always felt wrong. My room had earned the infamous title of the creepy room. It wasn't a title given lightly. Even as a child, I could feel it, something lurking in the walls, in the shadows. I refused to sleep there, and at 10 years old it was embarrassing to crawl into my parents' room night after night. So I came up with a compromise. "Mum, can I sleep on the couch?" I wasn't brave enough to be alone, though. I dragged my mom downstairs with me. Our house had 2 levels, and while the bedrooms and bathrooms were upstairs, downstairs was the family room, where the couches were, a long leather couch, a love seat, and a recliner. My mom grudgingly agreed to sleep on the larger couch while I curled up on the love seat. I told myself it was safer downstairs, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. The nights weren't completely dark. The large windows around the room let in slivers of moonlight, casting eerie shadows across the floor. My dog, an old black German shepherd, would lie at the foot of the love seat. She was my only real comfort. I'd reach out from under my blanket, my only shield against whatever might be watching, and stroke her fur, making sure she was still there. I couldn't leave any part of my body exposed. Even my hair had to be tucked under the blanket, as though something might grab me if it wasn't. The heat under the covers became unbearable, but the thought of pulling the blanket off, even for a second, was terrifying. I didn't sleep much. The heat, the sweat, the discomfort, all of it was secondary to the feeling of being watched. I'd stare up at the dark ceiling, listening to the clock in the kitchen tick away the seconds. It was past midnight when I first heard it, the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. Someone or something was moving around in the basement. I could hear the soft crunch of feet stepping carefully over the plastic tarp my parents had laid down for painting. The sound was unmistakable. The heavy smack of bare feet on the concrete floor sent chills racing down my spine. My fingers twisted in my dog's fur, but even she had gone still, as if she sensed it too. The basement door was locked, I knew it. My parents were both asleep upstairs. So, what, was down there? The footsteps continued, echoing through the house. They would pause now and then, like whoever, or whatever, was down there was stopping to admire something. or maybe it was looking for something. There were storage rooms in the basement, filled with old things, forgotten things, my parents' old collectibles, work equipment. But why did it take so long? Why was it still there? For nearly an hour, I lay there, frozen in fear, listening to the slow shuffle of footsteps moving through the basement. My heart pounded so loud in my chest that I was sure it could hear me. At one point, I imagined it coming up the stairs, its shadow growing larger as it climbed toward me. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified that if I opened them, I'd see something standing at the top of the stairs. I kept telling myself it would stop, that I was imagining it. But the steps never faltered, and the feeling of dread grew heavier, like the air was thickening around me. I didn't have my glasses on, so trying to see was useless. All I could do was listen. Then it happened, a sudden, loud bang. The sound echoed through the house, shattering the eerie silence. I sat up so fast I nearly ripped the blanket in my hands. My dog lifted her head, but even she seemed startled. For a moment I was paralyzed, gripping the blanket so hard my knuckles turned white. Something had fallen, or worse, something had hit something down there. That was it. I couldn't stay there any longer. I threw the blanket aside and ran upstairs, not caring if I made noise or if something followed me. I bolted to my room and didn't stop until I was under my own covers, too terrified to move. The next morning, I finally gathered the courage to go back downstairs. The basement looked the same, almost. But then I saw it. The paint can, it had been tipped over, lying on its side. On the can was a deep dent, as though something heavy or strong had slammed into it. There's no way it just fell. The angle was too sharp, the force too deliberate. But what scared me most wasn't the dent. It was the faint marks on the plastic tarp beneath it. Impressions like someone or something had walked across it. I stared at those marks for a long time, unable to shake the feeling that whatever had made them was still close by, watching me. I never slept on that couch again.